where our files are located. That is what our folders pretty much help us to do. So in this particular instance, I know it's not very clear, but as you can view, there's folders that contain different information. So what are you guys supposed to know? You're supposed to know how the folders work, where each folder uh, appears, and how you can actually work with it. I'm not sure if I brought a flash, but we're also just supposed to learn how that works. So let's have an example of a folder. So we've got folders, and we see where each of the folders work. What we need to then see is the following. We are now on local drive C. We double click on users. We double click on the current user. We double click on the desktop, and we've got an empty folder. However, if we come back to our desktop, we then actually realize that we've got a recycle, but that is not a folder. So let's create our first folder. To create our first folder, we just right click, we go to new, we select folder, and then we put the name of our folder, which can be intro to Windows, like that. So having that folder there now, we've created our folder on our desktop, and in our location, we went to C, we went to users, we went to the username, we went to the desktop, and by creating that folder on the desktop, in this location now, we can now be able to access this particular folder. So the folder that we have created is called Intro to Windows, and that's the folder that we are currently in. So what does it help for you to know what is happening with our folders? Our folders help us to know where to store our information. Okay, I've said quite a number of things. I'd like you to stop me if you've got questions. If you need me to repeat, you can let me know so that I repeat. If you need me to explain further, you can also let me know whilst we are proceeding. So far we've looked into how to navigate our operating system, how to access folders. We haven't proceeded from there, but if there are any questions, you can ask me questions if you have any at the moment. Okay, so let us proceed. So when you're working with your operating system, like we said, we want to add information to our phone. How do we do that? There is one way of adding information, which is you can actually add your files within the specific folder, or you can add your files outside of the folder itself. So for example, if I right click and I select new, I can then create a text document, and then I call it my research, like that. I've created a text document outside of my folder, but I can also add my document to the specific folder. At the same time, I can also go into my folder, right click, select new, and then put a different element. So for example, I can select a briefcase, and then I call it my work, like that. So those are two variations of how we can add information into our folder. So my work is within my folder, and then outside of my folder, I've got my research. So both work hand in hand. Okay. So what if we want to copy my research into my folder? I can simply right click, select copy, get into my folder, right click, select paste. That way I've added information to my folder. Okay. I think if we've got more, we eventually add to our intro to Windows. I'd want us now to move to a slightly different learning technique, or to learn about our operating system. So ideally, we've got our Windows and we've got our Linux. Apparently, my Linux is misbehaving now after I restarted it. Maybe let me close it and try and reopen it. Hopefully it will work properly, because I'll still need you guys to know how Linux works. But whilst that is happening, let's move on to some of the things that we will learn as we are doing our introduction. So outside of, okay, now I think it's behaving better. Outside of just working with our operating system or learning how our operating system works, we would need to learn about some of the following. I'm realizing in my other machine, that is on the virtual machine, I don't have some of the elements that I would need to work. So let me just create a folder for our learning. And we get to see what we can add to this particular folder. So some of the things that you need to learn are as follows. We need to work with Microsoft Word. So I can right click, I go to new, I create a .docx document. So this is Word file, like that. From there, we need to learn the next one, which is a PowerPoint. So this then becomes PowerPoint file. From there, we need to work with internet and email. So with our internet and email, we might need to learn about the following. Let me actually just open, because at least I use Outlook here. Let me just open my Outlook so that you see what Outlook looks like. So we'd also need to work with Outlook. Okay, so for example, we've got the following, which is my email. Okay, so we would need to know how our emails work, what our emails provide, and how each email can be addressed. Okay, so we need to understand how emails work. At the same time, we would also need to know how the internet works. Okay, unfortunately, we're not connected. Let me see if there's a Wi-Fi we can use. If it works, at least I can be able to then show you what each element does. Okay, whilst we're waiting for that, there's also another element we need to work with, which is our Excel file. Okay, so we need to work with our internet, we need to work with our email, we need to work with our Excel, our PowerPoint, our Word, and finally our internet. So internet, email, Excel, PowerPoint, Word, and intro to computer. So all these elements will actually be working with them whilst we are doing our course or during our course. Okay. Are there any questions so far, or should I proceed? Yes. Technically, yes. You guys are supposed to be having computers that you can actually work, because without a computer, it's difficult to do some of the things that I'm telling you about. And at the same time, you also do assessment based on the things that we are doing now. So this is also an examinable course that you work with until the prescribed time that you've got. And I think according to how it's been working, just have a week to learn how some of these things work, and you will have an exam at the end of, I don't know if it's the first week or after you've done everything else that you're supposed to learn, but you are then examined on this. So, but the advantage that you've got is, as you're working with this, you are learning the things that you will use throughout the time that you are here. So at one point you use PowerPoint, at one point you use Word, at one point you use Excel, at one point you use email, at one point you use the internet, at one point you'd also use your operating system. Okay, so at least Ubuntu is now back online. So let me just log in and also show you how Ubuntu works. I don't know if I had answered your question or if it sparked another question to a different individual. So in Ubuntu now, life is a bit different, or things are a bit different, whereby we've got the folder written home. If you double click on it, we'll be able to see what is stored in our home. So we've got a desktop, documents, downloads, music, pictures, public, templates, video. We can select any of these folders and see what is stored within the folder. Okay. However, we want to still do the same thing that we did in our window, where I can right click, I click on a new folder, I then call it intro, like that. So in other words, I've got a folder called intro, and I can also double click into it and see what my intro contains. I can also right click and create another new folder, or I can create a document. However, my documents are different from the way I do it in Windows. So I might need to select where it says LibreOffice Writer. I double click there. Okay, and it's doing that. It asks me so many questions. I just click on OK, and then it shows me the following. So for me to save this information to my folder, I'll then now need to know how to access that particular folder. So I click on File, I go to Save As. I'm then supposed to look for the location. So it's under Home, it's under Bamboo, it's under Desktop, it's Intro. I then save my work as follows. I click on Save, and then now I have saved my work within a specific folder. So the reason why I then decided to have the two systems side by side is so that I can be able to show you how each element works. Although by default now, our Linux does not do some of the things that our Windows can do, unless the operating systems have been installed. For example, I showed you Outlook in Windows. In Linux, we've got Thunderbird, which does exactly the same thing as our Outlook, but it's a different platform that still gives us emails, that still gives us what we are hoping to get. And then, are there any questions? Or we are still good to go? Okay, and remember 5 o'clock, finishing at 5, huh? And you are not talking to me. You want me to get tired. Let's interact. And also, I think if we interact, we can be able to maybe round up a bit faster, or round up a little bit better than what we are doing so far. Okay, so for example, with this one now, it's just now telling me about setting up an email, setting up a password, etc. Since I don't have internet, I don't think I would need to do that. But it then shows me the following. So I've got my email, I've got my calendar, I've got my address book, I've got a chat, got a file link, news group, feed. Okay, these are some of the things that I need to work with if I'm doing my email. At the same time, I also mentioned we've got PowerPoint. So for example, if I select that particular one, it shows me the PowerPoint version of Linux, which is LibreOffice Draw. I've also got the Excel version of Linux, which is also LibreOffice Calc, like that. So these are the elements that we can also work with if we are working in Linux. Okay? So we might need to know what each of the elements do and view what each element does. So for example, we've got LibreOffice Calc. I think it will be easier if I work with Linux, I switch to Windows. I work with Linux, I switch to Windows. So with our Calc, it's pretty much spreadsheet. We need to know how our spreadsheet works, what we need to put in our spreadsheet, and how each element can be done. So in a nutshell, a spreadsheet is a file that contains a lot of columns and a lot of rows. So what are our columns from A to almost infinity? I think we've got from A, just basic A, to A up to AZ, and then we've got from 1 up to almost 10 million, roughly. So in other words, if we go sideways, we can view all the variations of the columns, where I think it actually goes to AZ, something along those lines. So that's going from left to right. If we also go from top to bottom, we can go up to about 10 million. So we've got a lot of rows and columns within our spreadsheet. Okay. And then at the same time, we can also reference certain things within our spreadsheet. So this is what our spreadsheet looks like in Linux. Okay. Let's move over to Windows. I think Windows will be better and slightly clearer. So in Windows, we call it Excel. Okay, I did open Excel, but this is not the version that I'll be wanting to work with. But it should show you exactly the same concept, whereby we've got our columns from A to, like I said, up to AZ. So there's quite a lot of columns that we've got, and from 1 going all the way down. And each element contains a cell, and the cell is what we can actually work with whilst we are doing whatever it is that we want to do in Microsoft Excel. Okay, so this then becomes the appearance for Excel, and this then becomes the appearance for LibreOffice Calc, which is exactly the same as our Excel. Okay, so moving on from there, we've also created a Word version, which is a LibreOffice writer. So in our writer for Ubuntu, it looks like that, where we've got our page where we'll be able to write stuff. At the bottom, we've got a list of elements that we can work with. We can also decrease and increase the size of the page. We've got different formatting methods that are there. That's part of what we also want to learn as we are doing our intro. If I move back to Windows, I can also open my Word, which is a different kind of Word from what we've got in Linux. I will have content that looks like. So in our Windows, we'll then find we've got things like your file, your home, your insert, design, layout, references, mailings, review, and view. We've also got the navigation panel, which gives us pages and results, but we'll need to explain how these elements work in full detail. Okay, so that then becomes our Word, and in our Linux, it will be our writer. Okay, then the last bit would be our PowerPoint, which is this one. And then in this particular instance, we call it our draw. Okay, so our draw will simply have the following aspect. We can be able to put various elements in this particular platform. It's also part of what you guys would need to learn for this course. And when you have appreciation or an appreciation of how this works, you can then be able to learn how the draw works, especially in the two operating systems. However, at the same time, we can also open the same file in PowerPoint, which is now our Windows version of the same software. So be needing to know how each of these elements can be linked. So those are our 3 applications so far. The email one, we've seen how it actually works in Windows, because in Windows, at least I'm working with it. We then need to see how each of these elements work. So for some of you who then may be asking, what comes next? I give you the concept, but as it stands, some of you might not have computers, but you still need to work with the computer. So what I would recommend is, as we are doing what we are doing, you've got labs here, try and get access to your lab. Whenever we are done, we then try and practice as much as possible what we have done. That is also suggested I record some of these. So you can have a recording whereby you just go through some of the things that you have done so that it becomes easier for you. Bearing in mind, this will help you throughout your course. So starting now, till you guys are done, you'll be referencing some of these things that you can do. So the advantage would then be, at least you have an appreciation of how things work. There was a suggestion throughout the university that maybe the lab will increase. I don't know if it will happen whilst you're still learning, or maybe something that's for the future. You can be able to practice as much as is possible. So some of you might then ask, is there a specific outline? Yes, there is an outline that is there. Initially, we used to have some of these courses throughout the campus as one ICDL certificate that you then get. But over time, that then became a bit more expensive, which is why we are now creating our own version of ICDL. But the idea is, when we are doing ICDL, it's for you to get an appreciation of how the computer works. So with some of the examples that I've given you pretty much the entire example of how this system works, and how you can learn. One second, my internet is working, so that when we are doing the international part, I can show you. Because hopefully in this lesson I want one now done. Okay, seems to be connected. I'll connect my internet so that you guys can see what our internet and email has done. Okay, so with the previous group, here's also what we did. There was a group that was created where, if there are any questions, or if you want some of the videos, you can then be able to upload. And some of the videos now with larger than what WhatsApp could take. So we'd also have versions of whatever a cloud platform. So, for example, YouTube or whatever element we can be able to work with, so that you guys can be able to practice as much as is possible. Okay, so that's the brief uh, run down on how this course is supposed to be structured and how you guys are supposed to work with it. Still, there are no questions. Anyone, someone, everyone. Let us proceed. So I want to connect to the internet as well so that you guys can see part of what we'll be working with. So the Wi-Fi doesn't seem to be doing me any justice. Let me try and use my computer briefly, although I will not do it for long because of data. Good. So I think I'm online. Um, yes, I'm online and I think I can show you. Let's just start with Linux. Hopefully it's also linked to the same internet. Okay, so let's say we go to a specific website, herald.co.zw. See if the internet is working there. I can see on the other windows it's working. Okay, it seems to be connecting. So perfect. So as part of the internet, as you can see on our Linux, we have Firefox, which we have seen in our Windows. We can be able to actually open it, type up our address, access the internet. On our Windows, the same applies. If I go to my Windows, we can open our address, whatever we type up there, we can be able to work with our internet. So that's part of what we're also going to be learning. We want to know how to use the internet. We also want to learn how to use our emails. We also want to know even how to create those very same emails. Okay? But as a rule of thumb, you guys are supposed to be having a local email, which is our student email. So you have an email that is .uz.ac.zw. Part of the reason why we give you that email, in some instances, you get students using a student email. So if you want to practice something along the lines of your course, you need to have a student email that is .uz.ac.zw, and also for your own personal stuff. So for example, let's say with you guys, I think I'll give you the first assignment. I'll need you guys to find out where you guys are. I would want by the end of tomorrow to get an email from you guys. So the email should just be My name is so and so. I'm doing vet science. This is my email address. That shouldn't be difficult for you guys. I don't know how. Maybe I can add an extra date. Today is Tuesday. Maybe you can give me by Wednesday. You send me an email with your user email. And then, ndokupai yangu ndotokupai. Right. Saka monditumirani email. Ukamwandikira yako na watu wengi. Ndikuda yeyise. And then, right. So we'll be working with emails and things like that. For those who are still new to this, don't worry. We are learning. And then I'll give you an example. Every time we have this stuff, people usually think that it's standard. It's never standard. We are all coming from different places. We all have different experiences. We all have different things happening. So we can be able to learn and adjust as we proceed. Adil. Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I think I'll give you guys for some of the things that we'll be needing to know, for some of the things that we'll be needing to work with, as follows. For a start, we said we've got our word, which looks like that. We've got the appearance of our word. Unfortunately, I don't have a formula. Very helpful now, whereby we need to know what our Microsoft Word is about. So this, we refer to that as our Microsoft Word page. This, like I also mentioned when we started, is our navigation. We've got our toolbar, which is standard. So the one application that has the most to learn is Microsoft Word. So there is always something that you need to work with or that you need to learn in Microsoft Word. At the same time, we've also got our PowerPoint. Our PowerPoint has a similar setup. The difference that's there in our PowerPoint is as follows. We are saying we've got our toolbar or our menu, which is that one, very similar to our Microsoft Word. We've got our document, or we've got our page, which is that one, which has click to add title, click to add subtitle. At the same time, we've got a mini navigation that is on the side. And then everything else pretty much is the same. So we'll explain some of the things, but the application specific element will then be able to explain in detail when we are dealing with the various elements or aspects that we are working. From there, we also have our Excel, which we had opened like that. I'll need to also open with Excel, but for the purposes of this illustration, I think I can work with this as well. We've got our toolbar, where in this case it's slightly different from our Excel because we're using a different aspect. And this we see here. So from A to whatever and 1 to whatever, we actually call this a workbook, right? And then this workbook also contains the following. We can be able to add sheets. So at the bottom here, we've got sheets that we can add to our workbook. So what it then means now is we can have as many sheets as is possible. So there's no limit to the number of sheets that we've got. There's no limit to the number of columns that we've got. There's also no limit to the number of rows that we've got. So in other words, we can then be able to say, for example, if we create a list of University of Zimbabwe students from the time we start, we can be able to fit all of them in an Excel sheet. And why? Because we are saying we are incrementing whatever it is that we want to increment. We can also specify those individuals in each sheet. Or we can then be able to say each and every discipline has its sheet, has its students, and each student is actually recorded according to a specific format. So those are some of the things that we can work with in terms of our Microsoft Excel. Let me actually open Excel itself so that we can see what the Excel software looks like. Okay, now I'm getting that error because I've opened the same file in two different applications. So in our Excel, you can see everything pretty much looks exactly the same. Okay, so what else do we need to learn? We also need to learn how to save these files. Okay, when we have created the files, we also need to know how to save them and how to put them in a specific order that represents each of our files. Okay, so we then work with our files as follows. The next thing we want to do is we want to learn how to save our files. So these files we created, we did not save them. So they got their own naming that we used when we were creating them. So we can do this in Excel as follows. So I go to File, I go to New, I select Blank Workbook. So it was File, it was New, it was Blank Workbook. It gave me that particular document. So I would want to now save this file as whatever I'm hoping that it may be. Okay, so I go to File, I go to Save As, I go to Browse. In Browse, I select the location that I had, which was Vet Science, and then I would need to then save it in that particular location. So if you remember, we were talking about folders when we started. This was the reason why we needed to learn our folder. Okay, so we then do the following. We now need to save this document. So what can we save it as? Let's say we want to put vehicle imports in Harare, something like that. So we are creating a file that we want to be able to work with. So we've called it vehicle imports in Harare, and then this then becomes our Excel file. If we go back to our folder, we'll actually see that the new file that we've saved now appears in our folder. We can do the same with our Word file, where we go to File, we go to New, we select Blank Document, and then we go to File, and then we go to Save As. We select Browse, we go to Desktop, we go to Vet Science, we then want to save this as a different document. So to do that, let's say for this Word document, we want to call it University Register. Click on Save, and then we've got our University Register saved. Same goes to our PowerPoint file. We go to New, we select Blank Presentation. We can also save it as Desktop Vet Science, and then we call it Sample Presentation, like that. So we click on Save. So taking note that if we go back to our folder, we now have the new elements that we've got. So we've got our sample presentation, university register, vehicle imports in Harare. Okay, so those are the elements that we've got. But at the same time, we might also need to take note of the following. Right, we might need to take note of the following. So we said we've got folders, right? What do folders do? They are stored in sequence. So we are saying at any given point in time, the main folder that we've got is C. If we want to get to the next folder, we then need to know the location of that particular folder. So it can be users. From there, we can need to learn that outside of users, we've got a user profile. From there, we can have a desktop. And so that's how our folders work. We are saying everything we've got is stored in folders. And those folders have a sequence of how each folder works. From there, we then create files, right? To create our files, we need to have an extension. So each file has an extension. What does this extension do? This is what is known is a known file format. Okay, so for example, we've got docx, that's for Word. We've got a pptx, that's for PowerPoint. We've got an xlx, that's for Excel. So these are some of the things that we need to take note of in terms of our files and how we work with our windows and each of the elements that we've got. Okay. Outside of that, we might also need to know of our icons, right? What are our icons? These are images that link to an application. So those are some of the things that we need to take note of in our window or through our windows and how our windows pretty much work. Okay, still no question. Okay, let us proceed. Now we've stood right. Okay, so um, I may occasionally switch, although I'm encouraged not to switch. They say I'm supposed to just speak in English only, but excuse me if I slip and I put a bit of short. Okay, so let us go through some of the things that we might need to go through. So the key thing with all these aspects is the following. Each of these elements that we'll be working with, we might need to design and see how each element works. So for example, with the internet bit, we can be able to actually create a web document or a web file. So maybe let's look into that, and we combine a bit of internet and email into this particular lesson. So I go to File, I select New, select Blank Document. So here's where it becomes interesting. When we are saving this file, we want to save it as a web page. So we go to File, we go to Save As, we go to Browse, we select Desktop, select Vet Size. And then now we want to create our page. So we can call it vet page, like that. I select Save As Type, and then under Save As Type, I select Web Page, I select Save. Okay. So after selecting Save, my web page is saved. However, I still have a blank web page. So what do I do next? I might need to just put some text so that we see how the web page works. So we can call it Vet Science Website. I highlight my text. I change a few things just for example purposes. I put it like that. I also change the color. Like that. So I click on save. Let's just say I've saved this. I come back to my folder. You then actually notice I now have a vet page, which is a different kind of icon from the icons that I've got. If I double click it, I should be able to see what my vet page displays. So on my web page, that is exactly what I will see. So in essence, I can also be able to create a website using my Microsoft Word. Are we together? Okay. Maybe since our web page is one of the simpler aspects, we can just add to it whilst we are working with our Word and a bit of our internet and our email. Okay. So as you can see, that is our web page. If we come back to our Word, we can see that that is what we have on our web page. Okay, so let's add some stuff. So on any website, we usually have some content. So for example, we will have a home, about, services, and contact, like that. So this then means we've got links that we want to work with. So we've got home, about, services, and contact. How do we work with those links? That's the next thing we want to maybe look into. So I'm combining a bit of Word and a bit of internet and email, and how websites are created. Okay, so I think I might have to shout a bit. I didn't know these guys were coming through. If I had known, maybe we would have combined our lesson into a shorter lesson. Okay, so we've got home, about, services, and contact. So how do we then work with this? We can highlight any of the words that we want. We right click, we select a hyperlink, and then the hyperlink takes us to a specific location. So before we do that, we want to actually have everything on one page. Okay, so the first thing we want is our home. The next thing we want is our about. The next thing we want is our services. The next thing we want is our contact. Okay, so home, about, contact. So we then need to mark these elements so that they are headings. So I highlight home, I highlight heading 1, I highlight about, heading 1, services, heading 1, contact, heading 1. Okay, so this then means let's resume so that we sort of finish up and get to the next stage. Okay, so we've got home, about, services, and contact. So we want to put some content. For example, we want to tell the individual, welcome to the vet website. Please go through what we have to offer. Okay, I think we might have to end early. That smell does not sound good for us.